Welcome to The Cellar. Welcome to another episode of Horrible Fates. Before we dive into today's stories, I want to give a quick reminder. If you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please consider subscribing and please turn the notifications on so that you never miss a new upload. You can also find my merch store and social media links, as well as the link to my audio-only podcast version of my episodes, all below in the description box of every one of my videos. I'd also like to quickly share with you all my brother's YouTube channel, Journey with J Bear. He just began his YouTube journey, and if you'd be so kind as to check out his channel, I would greatly appreciate it. If you like the content he makes, please consider subscribing. It goes a long way in helping a small YouTuber on their journey. Now, with all that said, let's not waste any more time and dive into today's stories. Before we dive into story 1, I want to give a quick shout out to Jenny Stern. Jenny reached out to me on Facebook and recommended this first story we are going to dive into. So thank you, Jenny, for bringing it to my attention, and if any of you have a story that you think would be interesting for me to cover, please send me an email at TheCellarTrueCrime@gmail.com. It was June 14th, 2007 in Baytown, Texas. Baytown lies around 26 miles east of Houston, on the northern side of the Galveston Bay complex near the outlets of the San Jacinto River and Buffalo Bayou. Baytown's estimated population is listed as being around 84,000 total residents. Now, before we dive into the details of today's story, I wanted to touch on some further research I did. In that research, I discovered that Baytown has a crime rate of 42 per 1,000 residents. This means that Baytown has one of the highest crime rates in America compared to all communities of all sizes. Being that Baytown is 26 minutes from Houston, this seems to make sense, as Houston is the city in Texas with the highest crime rate. Houston has a wide range of violent and property crimes. The violent crime rate in Houston is 164% higher than the Texas average. To put this into context, residents have a 1 in 88 chance of becoming a victim of violent crime. Factors that contribute to Houston's high crime rate include high poverty and unemployment rates and a lack of well-paying jobs. To give even more context, Baytown had a total of 3,425 reported crimes in 2007. That number would rise steadily over the next few years, with it peaking at 4,335 in 2009. In the early morning hours of June 14, 2007, 15-year-old Bobby Davis was out with his younger brother Austin and 4 other friends. Those friends were 15-year-old Blake Barger and 3 girls, Laurel Moyers, age 12, her cousin, Macy Moyers, age 14, and Colette Wyndham, age 14. Now, I don't know what the group was up to, but from what has been reported, it appears that they were up to just no good, as the group of friends would eventually get bored and seek out a vehicle to go joyriding in. They would soon find and steal a vehicle, and the group were on their way, cruising through the streets while most residents of Baytown were fast asleep. Shortly after stealing said vehicle, the pair would run into some bad luck, as the vehicle would break down on them, leaving them once again stranded and without a ride. It wasn't long before the group were once again going house to house looking for their next ride. They would eventually stumble upon a Jeep that was left open, and once again the group of friends would all climb in. Before long, they were back to cruising the quiet streets of Baytown. It was around 4 a.m. when the pair began driving down East Archer Road. I know for many of you, you're probably wondering, where are the parents in all of this? How is a group of 12, 14, and 15-year-olds just allowed to be out and about at 4 a.m. casually stealing people's cars? Well, it's a good question, and according to reports, the teens all snuck out of their houses that night. Bobby Davis was one of the oldest 2 boys in the group, and he was the one who seemingly took charge of driving the vehicle. He would soon begin his way down East Archer towards the 3000 block where a train crossing sat. Now, from what's been reported, it appears Bobby was aware of this train crossing, as the decision was soon made to speed up towards it in order to get some air under the vehicle as they hit the track. Now, This particular crossing had nothing, and I mean nothing, set up to warn people of a potential train being on the track. There were no crossing gates, there were no lights, there was simply nothing there to warn anyone. As the kids approached the track, the vehicle continued to gain speed. Just before reaching the crossing, Bobby would lock up the brakes of the vehicle, but it was already far too late. The Jeep Grand Cherokee would smash into one of the train's tank cars. The impact was violent, shearing the roof of the vehicle off. The roof would later be discovered on the other side of the tracks in a drainage ditch. With the roof gone, the vehicle, driven by speed and momentum, would become wedged under the tank car before it finally came to a rest. Following the collision, emergency personnel would be called to the scene, a scene that I'm certain many of them wished to never have to think about again. It would take some time, but all those in the vehicle would be pulled from the crash site. Miraculously, the driver, Bobby Davis, would survive. The person sitting next to him in the front passenger seat, Blake Barger, would also survive the ordeal. In the end, the rest were not so lucky. Bobby's younger brother, Austin, as well as Laurel Moyers, her cousin Macy Moyers, and Colette Wyndham would all perish on that night. 4 young lives cut short well before they ever truly had a chance to live. There's not a ton of detail on what exactly happened to each person, but it was reported that all 4 suffered skull fractures as well as other head injuries. It was a horrible and tragic incident of the worst kind. So let's get into what exactly happened. Now, for some reason, a train had been sitting idle at that spot on the tracks for over half an hour. Add to it the fact that there was no warning of this train being there, and the simple negligence and inexperience of the young kids driving around in a stolen vehicle. It's all a recipe for disaster. Many were outraged and blaming the railroad for the entire ordeal. In my research, I did find that this particular railroad crossing was only 3 to 4 months away from being upgraded and given the safeguards it needed. In the end, Bobby Davis was charged with 4 counts of manslaughter. He would end up pleading no contest, and he would be sentenced to 8 years in juvenile custody. When he turns 18, he will either be transferred to a state prison or be put on parole. For some, this punishment was too much. For others, it was too little. In the end, Bobby will have to live the rest of his life with what happened. He lost 3 friends and his little brother in this tragic incident. At the same time, numerous families were destroyed when their children never came home on that fateful night in June of 2007. At the end of the day, I think there's plenty of blame to go around in this case. Should that railroad crossing have safety measures in place? Yes, of course. I think anyone could have collided with the train on that night. But what made this so devastating was the inexperienced driver and dangerous level of speed. Far too often, teenagers believe themselves to be invincible. Luckily, a lot of them get away with doing stupid things. Hell, I know I sure have. But it's plain and simply not always the case. Now, I don't have an in-depth look into each one of the teenagers' home lives, so it's hard to say too much, but I do have to question where the parents were. Not only should all of these teens been at home and in bed, but they sure as hell should not have been out stealing vehicles to take on joyrides. Not only did they rob one vehicle, they robbed a second one when the first one quit on them. Sadly, nothing can be done to bring back any of these poor lost souls. As always, I want to send my deepest condolences to all of the friends and family members of those lost within this sad, sad story. I also hope, in shining a light on this story, that maybe, just maybe, another incident like this one can be prevented. This next story takes us to Broadstone. Broadstone is a suburb of Poole in Dorset, England. It is located around 3 miles or 5 kilometers from the Hamworthy railway station and 7 miles or 11 kilometers from the Bournemouth International Airport. Broadstone has a population of around 10,200 total residents. One of those residents, 60-year-old Elena Struthers Gardner, was in her home and making her way towards her kitchen. Elena was a former jockey who had suffered an injury while riding when she was 21 years old. This injury left Elena with mobility issues. She had suffered multiple fractures to her lumbar spine, which resulted in her having scoliosis. It was hard for Elena to get around, and the injuries only worsened with time, leaving her in constant pain. She would be prescribed fentanyl for a time, but she became highly addicted to the substance. Doctors worked with her to wean her off the drug, but the pain continued, and Elena would start self-medicating with alcohol to get through the tough days. Elena would slowly and painfully make her way into the kitchen. She would then proceed to grab a Mason-style drinking glass from one of her kitchen cabinets. She would fill the glass up and screw the lid on, placing a metal straw into the top of it, as straws were the easiest way for her to drink fluids. Now, not everyone may be aware of this, but over the course of the last 6 or so years, plastic straws have been banned throughout numerous U.S. states. California, Oregon, New York, Washington, D.C., and Colorado in particular. The UK would follow suit in October of 2020. The reason for the ban is that plastic straws have become a major contributor to plastic pollution worldwide. A lot of the straws that are used and thrown away tend to end up in the oceans and other waterways. There, they can harm marine life. Making matters worse, they also take up to 200 years to decompose. With the ban on plastic straws in place, people have begun using metal and solid plastic straws that can be washed and reused over and over. In Elena's case, she had a 10-inch metal straw that she would wash and reuse. With her beverage now in hand, Elena would begin making her way out of the kitchen and towards her den. Now, it's not clear on what exactly happened next, but as we said, Elena was very prone to falls. As she made her way to the den's entrance, she fell forward, drink still in hand, as her and the mason glass cup crashed to the ground. Somewhere around the house, Elena's wife Mandy was doing some chores. She never heard Elena fall, but eventually she would make her way towards the den of the house. That's where she would find Elena face down on the ground. Mandy described Elena as just lying there, making unusual gurgling sounds. She stated that she could see the glass jar was there near her, still intact, and with the straw sticking out of it. What she also noticed was that the 10-inch straw was also sticking out of her wife, Elena. Mandy would call emergency services immediately. While on the phone, she would notice that Elena had seemingly stopped breathing. She relayed this information to the dispatcher, who instructed her to try and roll Elena over onto her back. Mandy would do so, and that's when she saw the extent of what had happened. When Elena fell, she landed right onto the metal straw that was in her cup. The metal straw had zero give to it. Also, to add to the situation, the way the straw was in the cup, well, it locked the straw into position, meaning that the straw had almost no give to it in any direction. When Elena fell, she landed just right on that metal straw. The force of her body coming down on top of it forced the straw to go through her left eye. Being that the straw was 10 inches long, it buried deep into her eye socket and into her brain. Mandy was horrified by what she was experiencing, and soon emergency personnel arrived on scene. They would rush Elena to the Southampton General Hospital. At the hospital, Elena would fight for her life while doctors did all they could to save the woman. But in the end, doctors were unable to fix the damage that had been done to her brain. Elena Struthers Gardner would pass away the next day at 60 years of age. Elena's death would ultimately spark more debate on the use of rigid reusable straws. Elena's wife would state, "I just feel that in the hands of mobility-challenged people like Elena, or children, or even able-bodied people losing their footing, these straws are so very long and very strong." In my research, I found more instances of metal straws causing injury and death. In particular, I found plenty of instances where children suffered while using them. As you know, children are prone to being a bit clumsy and are at an increased risk of falling down. A lot of times kids fall and take their cups right with them to the ground. These straws can be very dangerous, as they basically become an item that can impale any individual. In telling Elena's story, I hope I can share enough information to make more people aware of the dangers of reusable straws. Whether you're someone prone to falling, or dealing with any kind of mobility issue, or you have a child who likes to drink from straws, I hope in sharing this story we can create some more awareness and hopefully prevent another story like this one from ever taking place. As always, my deepest condolences go out to Elena, as well as all her family and friends. This next story takes us to Fleet. Fleet is a village, civil parish, and electoral ward in the South Holland district of Lincolnshire, England. Fleet lies on the Delft Bank, 3 miles or 4.8 kilometers southeast from Hull Beach. The population of Fleet is listed as being around 2,100 or so residents. One of those residents was 80-year-old Arthur Sexton, a retired printer. For those that don't know, a printer is someone who is responsible for producing a variety of materials, such as labels, newspapers, books, and posters. Printers use specialized skill to operate various different machines. The job often entails assessing print orders, selecting materials, and performing quality checks. Printers are often left to maintain the numerous machines they work on to ensure they're kept in tip-top working order. Arthur had long since retired and was enjoying a quiet life with his wife in their 3-bedroom home in the quaint village of Fleet. Arthur and his wife had 2 children in their lifetime and were now blessed with 1 grandchild that they adored. With some backstory out of the way, we'll now head to March 11, 2011. At around 4 p.m. that afternoon, Arthur proceeded to make his wife a cup of tea. His wife would sit down and relax with her drink while Arthur went outside to work on some things around the house. A few hours would pass by, and Arthur's wife had not seen or heard from him. Knowing he couldn't have gotten far, she started looking around the property, but her search came up empty. It was getting dark at this point, so Arthur's wife walked next door to see if her neighbor could help search for Arthur. The police were immediately called while the neighbor grabbed a light and began searching around the couple's property. In the midst of searching, the neighbor came around the back side of the shed. That's when he saw Arthur's legs straight up in the air in what was a very unbelievable scenario. After Arthur had made his wife a cup of tea, he had left the house to go outside and do some work. Now, it's not clear exactly what he was doing, but at some point Arthur grabbed some stepladders and brought them over behind the shed. Arthur would proceed to climb up the flimsy stepladder, but he wasn't prepared for what would happen next, as the stepladder collapsed shut while he was standing on top of it. Arthur would fall forward, head first towards the ground below, but Arthur would never hit the ground. Behind the shed, Arthur and his wife had a water butt. For those that don't know, a water butt is a large, outdoor container that collects rainwater from a rooftop and stores it for use. Water butts are a popular and inexpensive way to harvest rainwater and can be used for many purposes, like watering plants, gardens, or even just storing water to drink or bathe with. Arthur would go falling headfirst into this water butt, leaving his legs sticking out of the top. By the time his neighbor found him, Arthur was already gone. His neighbor attempted to remove him from the container, but it wasn't easy as Arthur had seemingly become wedged in very tight. Ultimately, Arthur would be freed from the water butt and an ambulance would show up, but there was nothing that could be done. When Arthur fell headfirst, he became wedged upside down, with his head fully submerged in the water that was being held by the container. Unable to free himself, Arthur would panic and struggle to get free, but within moments he would run out of air and drown. In what might be one of the most horrifying fates I have ever covered on the channel. I simply can't imagine falling and becoming stuck upside down and headfirst inside a container that's full of water. Arthur's final moments had to have been terrifying, to say the least. In the end, Arthur's death was ruled as an accidental drowning, his end coming in a way that no one could have ever seen coming. As always, I want to send my deepest condolences to all of Arthur's family and friends. Thank you all for tuning in to another episode. If you enjoy the content, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps the channel continue to grow. It's also very important that you hit the notification bell and turn on notifications, as you may not be alerted of my uploads if you don't do so. In the description box below, you will find a link to my merch store and a link to the Cellar Dwellers membership tier for the channel. If you're interested, please take a moment to go check those things out. If you'd like to submit your own scary story or any kind of story recommendation, you can do so using the email linked in the description box below. As always, I do all the research, writing, recording, and editing for the channel myself, so anything that you do to support this channel is greatly appreciated. And until next time, I will see you all again as we head back into the cellar.